When we were planning this panel, I was thinking, okay, who can we bring here? And, well, you already met all of these speakers. So Tejas, he wrote the book on Fluent React. Who are we going to give away during this panel and after the panel? And you can get a signing from him as well, because then we're going to roll a table there, and he's just going to do autographs. Don't ask him to draw stuff, or you can ask him, whatever.
I'll draw
so
stuff.
So Tejas wrote a book on React. We have Mateus, who's probably one of the most knowledgeable people about React, aside from the core team that I know, which is really good. We have Attila, who's part of the Solid JS DX team, and we have Elian, who is Astro Core. So, I'm going to open this panel first with a question from my own, and then when we finish the topic for the first question, I'm going to ask you in the audience if you want to ask a question. So when I ask you if you want to ask a question, please raise your hand, and your volunteers will bring you a microphone so that we here can hear you. So, let's start this thing with a very generic question, and just picking from the title of this. So, what is the future of JavaScript frameworks?
Well,
what's the start with this very open question?
Fine, I have the mic. It's interesting because there's a great talk by the great Jeremy Keith. You guys heard about? Have you all heard about Jeremy Keith? If you haven't heard about Jeremy Keith, look him up. He's Adactio, A-D-A-C-T-I-O, on social media. And he, in one of his talks, he mentioned a great concept called pace layers, where as things get more mature, they move slower. Think about HTML, right? A development from 20 years ago is a development from today. And it has more capabilities, but fundamentally it doesn't change very much because it now has like businesses, companies, people's lives built on top of it. And so it's kind of important that these things move slow. JavaScript is very similar. I think React and sort of reactive, interactive applications have been around long enough. React is 11 years old, and React moves slow. I think the future of JS frameworks, I'm assuming you mean for user interfaces specifically, that I think we're already seeing convergence, right? Everybody's using signals except React, and I'm sure we'll hear about that. But React is also, they're all just moving very slow, and they're sort of differentiating on smaller details, but I think we all kind of agree that reactivity looks like this, and some use JSX, and some use single file components. There's patterns that many of us are familiar with, and so I'd say the future looks comfortable, unless something radical comes along and changes everything. But then the question is, do we need that change? So to me, the future looks, I can't believe that I'm saying this in JavaScript, but somewhat stable. Yeah.
Oh,
hot take.
It's working.
Wow.
Just
Mic check, mic check. I feel like we'll be probably more than ever revisiting and recapping existing stuff from the past. It's kind of like, I had a session about it like the other day, but for example, there's this tweet by Dan Abramov from core team of React, where he links to a post from the Marco core team. Marco is a framework by eBay that was open source back in 2014. And this tweet is basically showing how a lot of the ideas, the great ideas the community has on streaming and all of that got popular from 2020, 2021 onwards. Marco was doing these back in 2014. And if you check that post from Marco, they're actually linking to another post from the .NET community from 2005 about streaming and partially rendering HTML and etc. So this is one example. I feel like things around compilers too. So the React community has this ongoing effort around compilers and the React optimization compiler, but Svelte was doing this a little before. And then if we go back, like I mentioned Elm in my session, but even before that, we have some efforts that never got super popular, I guess, but they were doing back in 2005, 2006, 2008, using some compiler technology to slice server and client code. So I feel like we'll see things cycling back with more and more ideas, but also we'll be more critical around what's just lost art from the past or what was perhaps a bad idea and that we should not reuse. I also think we'll have more and more heated discussions on things like hydration, for example. So we'll be discussing, like, people will come up with new ways of addressing the issues of hydration. So we got partial hydration, we got islands, we got whole different approaches like resumability. So we'll be revisiting the challenges of hydration, the challenges of SSR. I think that we'll be talking a lot about whether we want to do, like, whether SPAs were a good idea to begin with, and whether, like, multi-page apps, single-page apps, and this kind of thing. So yeah, I feel like I've been talking a lot.
Okay, so I'm gonna be the weird one and start the discussion. So I think that the choice about which framework to use is gonna become more and more niche going forward, because we have, like, a framework as big as React that, given the amount, the size of the community, it's not going anywhere for the foreseeable future. There's no chance in hell we cannot have nobody getting that upset with React to refactor all their code bases and something happens. It's not going to implode. And truth is, the state of modern frameworks are good enough. If you choose one and you know how it works, you can build good enough applications with them, most cases. But then you get the kind of niche thing where, like, for example, you have this no-build movement with the Rails guy, and then you have the creator of Svelte gave an interview the other day saying people pick their framework based on vibes. Like, I don't particularly know what that means, but yeah, like, I think everybody has their own definition of what it is, and I don't know. Then you also have, as Mateus just said, there's going to be a lot of heated discussion about some very specific topics. Like, there was some propaganda war about benchmarking and people using some benchmarking to show how this or that was doing great, and then they would look, oh no, but actually that's, you're not actually measuring what you're saying you're measuring, and then you go back and forth and trying to establish what is a good benchmark, and so on. So there's going to be a lot of discussions about that, and because there's so many frameworks and so many good frameworks, I think that's going to depend on which framework can, and it's not actually a race, it's not actually a war. I think they're going to coexist for a very, very long time. The thing, though, is it's becoming more important for people to understand how each framework works, or how the framework of choice works, to realize if they're a good choice for them or not. Like, I speak on conferences about Solid a lot, and I speak at React conferences about Solid. And then when I show some stuff about how Solid works, there are often a few group of React developers that come and say, oh my God, I didn't know I could live without that other thing, this or that. Like, the problem is not essentially React per se. Like, it's React carry this trade-off that people didn't know they were buying in. And then when they see there's a way out, they're like, okay, I'm actually a better fit that way, or this other way, and so on. So, like, there is, at this point, there's a framework for whatever you choose. If you want to build something, you don't like JSX, you have Vue, you have Svelte. If you like decorators, you have Angular, and so on. And so this depends. And each framework is going to have their own way of building stuff, and understanding how they do is going to be good enough. Like, there is a lot of talks about how the React ecosystem is so big. I think that's a double-edged sword, because the fact that it's so big, it takes a lot more effort to find the good tools that you can use, or the tools that are right for you. Meanwhile, in smaller communities, it's probably easier for you to build something that's exactly how you need, or people are actually more eager to hear your feedback and implement your solutions. And sometimes they have the right tool for the job for you. So I think it's going to be more about a case of end users picking the right tool for the job than just following a herd. And I think that's more or less the future. I don't think anything is going to go away. Nobody's going to be the React killer. Nobody's going to be the big one, whatever. It should be like a mix of everything.
I strongly agree. And I actually wanted to go in the same direction. Now, you have explained most, so I won't go that long. But no, but the thing is, it's very true that I think all of the frameworks have achieved the point that if you know the framework well enough, that you can build a performant website that has all of the web vitals, that passes Lighthouse, that's accessible. You can totally do that, like, independently of the framework. But one thing I will say, though, that I found interesting, you said you were assuming that it was about UI, about the user. I think it's actually the future of the frameworks lies more in the DX side and more in like the development experience. And I think we're seeing a very big shift there. Like when Astro came out, for instance, you saw very much like other people picking up, and it's a very good thing that moves. And I really hope that we can all strive for a better development experience, because if there is one thing that we all hate, it's debugging or not knowing where we are in our code base.
And this thing of not having a war and this kind of thing, it reminds me a lot one of the posts from Ryan Carniato, creator of Solid, last year, where like the whole core of the post is show that ideas like resumability or what React server components are trying to do, or islands and etc., they're not exactly fighting each other, but they just focus on addressing different parts of a bigger picture of problems. So there's not necessarily a war of frameworks and a war of approaches adopted by these frameworks. So, and the other thing is that I'm super on this good enough thing. For example, so my session was about addressing technical debt on a legacy code base where I couldn't find, you couldn't use Solid or Astro, whatever was the cool tech. So in the industry, a lot of times it's gonna be about finding what's good enough. And you'll notice that a lot of things like Angular are still good enough for, or React or etc.
Yeah, I want to plus one everything you all said, and I just need to emphasize this. You know, like React, recently at ReactConf announced their new React compiler, and they were saying this stuff makes React as reactive as Solid, and all of tech Twitter X, okay, don't come after me. All the X people lost their mind. Oh my God, no, Solid fine-grained reactivity is way faster than React. And he lost his mind. Daniel lost his mind. And we can hear his reason, but people weren't like, oh, no, this is not fine-grained reactivity. And then the React team started saying, okay, but like if you think hard enough and change what you mean by fine-grained reactivity, then we have it. And we end up like arguing about terminology that maybe matters, maybe doesn't. I will say this, and I think this is very important for all of us in this room. I had a discussion with the founder and CEO of Vercel, Guillermo Rauch, and he, you know, I asked him, I was like, look, man, your whole company is focused on making the web faster. You try like partial pre-rendering. They're doing all this stuff to like make experiences faster. And I said, why does it matter, right? Does it even matter? Because like if I go on twitter.com, I guess now x.com/something/notifications, I will see like 18 spinners, and it's a horrible experience, but I use it. And many of us, I'm not alone here, their entire careers are all built on it, as is mine. So I was like, does it matter? And Guillermo said something really cool. He was like, yes, it's a crappy experience, but we all are addicted to it. And so even if it's a bad experience, we want it enough that we're willing to tolerate it, right? Very few web properties are like this. New web properties have no chance. People will get frustrated and leave before they wait for your spinner. And so he mentioned, he was talking to the team behind X, and they are well aware that if they remove the spinners and actually make it partially pre-rendered and faster, all of their business metrics go up, all of them unanimously without question. Time on the website, time to first byte, and time people spend scrolling, therefore looking at ads, all of that goes up. So there is a case to be made for, yes, the performance matters, but how React, Solid, Astro, whatever gives it to you, doesn't. Because at the end of the day, a framework is just a tool, and you can be effective with a tool. Like if you go to a gym and you want to lift weights, but it's a crappy machine, you can still lift it and get some benefits, as opposed to, you know, going to like the best gym in the whole world. Anyway, that's, Attila, you had a response.
He always has.
Or shall we go to questions?
Yeah.
So let's open for questions then. You can ask about fine-grained reactivity in React if you want, but I just want to make sure that you all, at least one or two of you can ask questions. So, who wants to ask a question, raise your hand. Okay, you in the front. Can you bring the microphone here? And for this person, we're going to give away a book of Tejas, so I'm also going to ask the volunteers to take him this book. Make it a good question, exactly. That's what Tejas said.
Hi.
Hey?
What do you think about progressive web applications? Do they have a future?
Progressive web applications, will they have a future? So what's your take on that?
Okay. So you asked about PWA to the Tauri framework guy. I think PWAs are very nice. So just to make sure we are on the same page, so PWAs is when you augment your web app with a service worker, which is essentially a JavaScript that gets installed in your browser and brings some native-like functionalities. So with that, you can have like push notifications, you can have local caching,
Camera access.
You can have access to some like native APIs like the camera, stuff like this. So I think that the PWAs are a very nice initiative. I think they exist in probably in a transition state where you need to augment your web app in a certain way and give them like a native-like experience, sort of. So I'd like to see them grow and become more popular. I do like the web technologies a lot. I hope that they can still exist like that. But there's still going to be a case for like installed apps, at least while we have app stores and play stores and whatever stores, because no chance in hell they're going to let PWAs take all the cake.
Anyone wants to add something here? Okay, Mateus?
Full disclosure, I'm also biased because I've been a native iOS developer before, so. But I do see, so yeah, first, I do see future in a sense, but I feel like we have some technical barriers on the way that are still being addressed. And I don't mean specifically just Apple and just Safari and this whole narrative that's been going on for years, and that's way better now, by the way. But if you check a lot of APIs around sensors or around a lot of APIs that are designed for mobile usage to be used in normal devices, they're still not adopted. They're still not implemented in Firefox and Safari because of their security policies or their approaches to address this kind of thing. And I don't see this changing that soon for this thing. So tech-wise, this would be my concern. And on the other end, from a product perspective, I think that there are a lot of places where you as a user still need or still want an app that you're going to, like a regular native normal app. And my case for PWAs would be something like Uber, what the Uber Lite thing that you used to have. So if you didn't have the Uber app, but you still needed to get a ride, you would get a very, very simpler experience via a PWA and etc. So that would be, from a product perspective, the future I see for PWAs, like lighter versions of certain apps and etc.
Anyone want to add anything else? Okay. So anyone wants to ask another question? Okay, so there's two hands. The person in the back asked.
People are going to ask questions because they know that there are books now.
What did you say? I didn't hear what he said.
People are going to come up with questions now because there are books.
Yes. They just told me to throw the book at you. Now, I'm not going to throw the book at you. I'm going to ask the volunteer to come here and give you the book while you ask your question.
Thank you. So I just wanted to ask a quick question. So in the past, a couple of years ago, we had a focus on server-side rendering with PHP, and then we saw an evolution going for client-side compilation with React and all the other frameworks that came to be. And now we're seeing another shift to server-side rendering again. And I was just wondering, on your opinion, if we're going to actually stabilize on server-side rendering, or are we going to go back and forth?
Server-side rendering was the way, like, when I was a child, and it is the way of the future, and it was always the way, okay? And this is maybe the hottest take you'll hear from me, but I think single-page applications were a mistake. I think React, the Atom logo, the intention of I wrote the book on this, so I feel somewhat entitled to say this. I think it was supposed to be, you create a root for an interactive island on your website, and you attach React to that. And you represent an interactive component as JSX. But the rest of your site is server rendered or static. sort of how Astro does it. I do believe Astro is the way the web should have been since 2012, 2013. And so before React showed up, and people were like, wait, the entire page can just be JavaScript. Again, a mistake for many reasons. Nowadays, if you go to twitter.com without JavaScript, you see nothing. And so that was just, let's think of that as like the COVID-19 pandemic. It was like one of those, like, we don't know what happened in those years. Lots of things went wrong, okay? But before that, we had PHP on the server. We had .NET, we had Rails. All these years later, guess what? It's just JavaScript on the server doing the same thing. And so that is the paradigm. There is no other paradigm. The other paradigm is an experiment that works in some cases. Now, it's not always bad. This is the thing. People are going to hear me and go like absolutists, and people go on Twitter and be like, oh my God, he said that. Look, this is not like absolutes, okay? Like internal tools, desktop apps that you want for local stuff with like Tauri, for example. Even that you can technically do with a server. In any case, there's places for it. Back office tools where you don't care about the whole world as an end user because you're behind an intranet. Like there's places for it and you can move faster, but I think if we're doing something mass market, mass media, that has always been the way, and therefore it is stable, to answer your question. That's, again, my opinion, may be wrong.
In short, if I may?
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
So I feel like, I don't want to say that they're the future, but one thing that's been happening now and will continue to happen in the future is that we'll have more and more different attempts to play with the boundaries between client and server. So this has happened in the past with different efforts. More recently, in the backend communities, we have Hotwire, Livewire, we have like Elixir, the Elixir community, Ruby community. All of these communities are playing a lot of this. I think things like Quick or React Server Components and etc. are like a similar attempt to play with this boundary and properly allocate code, but coming from the front-end community. And I think we'll have more attempts, that's one thing. But at the same time, there are also things that were trending in the past, and I don't think there will still be use cases for them, like local first apps and this kind of thing. There will be tech conferences where you find talks about it. There will be people with very good cases or decentralized app, this kind of thing, that they will still exist. And they, by definition, will somehow collide with a future that's only about server. So I'm kind of +1 to his last conclusion, that is, there will still be cases for a lot of this kind of thing. What's going to happen, in my opinion, is more attempts to properly collocate and respect the boundaries, but have a proper DX as a final solution.
DX mentioned.
So I think that I think that there is one thing to note is that the kind of server-side rendering that we have today is not the same server-side rendering that we had before. And yes, having something that is entirely dependent on the client is not a good practice today, but it was a road we needed to go through in order to get where we are now, because I want anybody here who loves the GitHub experience where you merge a pull request and then you have a list of 5 items, but the counts show 6. Who likes that? That's state tearing. That happens because you're rendering components exclusively on the server. So you need to have some single page application functionality, which means for this kind of stuff. So this is possible to happen if you start to opening the divide. What we have today with the server side, the server components, and this kind of logic that is able to start on the back end and ends in the front end means that we're closing the gap for that state tearing to exist. So it's not that we're getting closer to what it was before. There are people that are trying that with, he mentioned Hotwire before, all those Rails app before. The performance is, it gets you initial first load, but like when you have an app that hydrates and that can do can synchronize with the backend, once you pay that initial tax to render what you need, it's way snappier. So they do talk a lot about that. If you have something no build, exclusively server side, and then you break your components and render the components on the server, it's going to be faster. But they're only talking about the first load. So there is all that. So it was a necessary road. Like if you see, like a lot of the stuff where we are in a bad place, human beings just tend to go to the other way around. So it happened that we had something that was extremely dependent on the backend. Like us as front-end developers could not go anywhere without talking to the backend team. And we were like, if you had a company that the backend team and the front-end team didn't connect very well, it was a pain in the behind to ship something. But then what happened is, okay, so let's bring all the logic to the front end because then we can ship stuff by ourselves. And then once we had all the logic in the front end, we started seeing a bunch of blank pages. Google went ahead. Now Google crawler can read JavaScript. And then we're like, okay, but now we have a better ideas. So I do think that what Astro did was actually addressing that particular kind of scenario. But Astro itself is not the whole solution. Because if you have highly interactive apps with the whole state tearing and stuff, you need to have something on your client side that can actually synchronize the state. Like what Alien did here, showing like the like buttons and stuff. If you have another piece of your UI that's counting on the likes as well, you need to have a way to connect them to. And Astro doesn't give you out of the box an ergonomic way to do that. So that's why you have other frameworks like Solid Start, like Nuxt or whatever, that can actually do this integrated logic. So it doesn't answer the whole story. It is a big part of the answer because most of our apps are actually very static landing pages and then we download 50 kilobytes of JavaScript. So all the frameworks are trying to solve that in many, many ways. Astro just solved that in a very medieval kind of way. Like, okay,
thank you.
No more. But it does addresses a lot of the issues.
Okay, so we are out of time. Alien, do you want to wrap up this discussion with final thoughts on this part?
I'll give a very short answer that I think is the same thing I've been saying for 3 years, is that the answer lies somewhere in the middle, right? Do you know like how a small kid draws like a Christmas tree? They always go back and forth and they go up. And basically they end up in the middle and then they create a triangle. I think that's basically what we're doing. We had server rendering and then we got full client rendering and now we're going back and forth and back and forth. And somewhere we want to end up in the middle and at the top, and I think that's the final answer. But to get there we'll need a couple of more years.